Welcome to the future of Israel and the Jewish people. I'm Frank Caporale, your host tonight, as always, and I'm here with my good friend, John Genoese.
Hi,
We're
Frank.
still doing Exodus, right, John?
Yes, sir.
We're going to finish this book eventually. We're up, I think, to Exodus 22. If you have your Bibles, please research along with us. At the end of the show, we'll tell you how you can communicate with us if you agree, disagree, or confused. Okay? John, what are we going to say about this fine chapter?
I believe it's chapter 21, I think, right?
Are we on 21?
Yes, sir. Chapter 21. I
Oh,
believe.
what did I say, 22?
Yes, sir.
All right.
All right.
Yep.
And so in chapter 22, we're going to have some jurisprudence. And we're going to look at the system of justice and the system of dispute resolution and things like that. Basically slavery, violent altercations, responsibility, and we're going to discover that the common understanding of an eye for an eye is completely wrong.
Yes, isn't it?
And shall we begin?
Yeah, we're 21, right?
Yes, sir.
Go
Chapter
ahead.
21, okay. Now these are the ordinances which you are to set before them. If you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve for 6 years, but on the 7th he shall go out as a free man without payment. If he comes alone, he shall go out alone. If he's the husband of a wife, his wife shall go out with him. If his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall belong to her master, and he shall go out alone. But if the slave plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out as a free man, then his master shall bring him to God, and then he shall bring him to the door or the doorpost. And his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him permanently. If a man sells his daughter as a female slave, she is not to go free as the male slaves do. If she is displeasing in the eyes of her master who designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He does not have authority to sell her to a foreign people because of his treacherous behavior towards her. If he designates her for his son, he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters. If he takes to himself another woman, he may not reduce her food, her clothing, or her conjugal rights. If he will not do these 3 things for her, then she shall go out for nothing without payment of money.
Well, you know, slavery is a very touchy subject in the world. And here in America especially, the mere mention of it gets people upset. But, you know, it is a fact that it happened. And to come unglued about things that are wrong in your eyes and then wrong in my eyes, it doesn't do you any justice to burn down the building, so to speak. What do you think about all of this? I know he was trying to make some rhyme or reason out of things that were going on to begin with, because ancient civilizations had slaves, and the Jews people had slaves that sold themselves into slavery over debt, okay? And so he sets a set of rules and regulations of dealing with slaves, and I doubt if the American slave owners ever read this part of the Bible or ever tried to apply any of this to it.
It was a completely different motivation behind it. As we'll read later, part of the system of jurisprudence was if a thief got caught and could not make restitution, then he was sold into slavery to make restitution for what he sold, and what he stole, and et cetera, et cetera. What we see here, though, is that there was no such thing as lifelong slavery unless the slave himself said, okay, I had wife and kids here, I settled here, my life is here, I'm going to be a permanent resident of this family. This is going to be a permanent thing. In which case, the master had to bring him to God first, then bring him to the doorpost, and pierce his ear with an awl. Now, as for the dealing with the female slaves, well, I mean, the notion that someone would sell his daughter as a female slave, again, it was probably to make restitution for some debt. Of course, that's abhorrent to us.
Well, it could be almost like a diary, but go ahead. It doesn't mention that, but in other
Okay.
words, unfortunately, men in those days thought everything was their property. Okay.
Yeah, this
And-
is completely alien to our way of thinking. But let's go back in time to their way of thinking and see how advanced this is as far as treatment of women go. Because here, let's look at from
Yep.
verses 7 through 11. Now again, slavery is abhorrent, but let's not judge it by modern standards. Let's judge it by those standards there. Slavery is abhorrent. But if a female slave couldn't just simply be put out, because how is she going to fend for herself? So she always had to be provided for.
to prevent prostitution.
Right. That's excellent. She always had to be provided for, and if the man who was letting his female slave go wouldn't do those three things for her that were mentioned, God defined his behavior as treacherous. So this man, the one who didn't do these three things, was regarded as a treacherous fellow. God himself said he behaved treacherously towards her. So as abhorrent as the notion of slavery is, or certainly as abhorrent as selling one of our children, we need to take it in the context of the time and understand that this was actually a leap forward, a huge leap forward, given the context of the times.
You know what this is reminding me of?
What's that, sir?
The penal system. A person robs or steals, he gets sentenced to 7 years in an institution, and he works for the institution, whether it's cutting grass, cooking, cleaning dishes, or mopping the floor in the penitentiary. As I walked out of the reception area of the prison last night, there were 4 women mopping the floor.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
So temporarily, they are in. Now, we talk about the slave that decided to stay. I heard testimonies from people that were in jail last night that said they thanked God the day they were arrested or they would have been killed. I heard them say that I'd rather be in here knowing God than being out there without knowing God.
Ain't that something?
Okay? So there is situations where, the situation you're in is worse than the situation we just described.
That's true.
What else you got, John?
And just to conclude here, you'll notice that whenever a female slave is talked about, basically a lot of it is the same thing as sort of you're treated with the same respect as a spouse. And in the eyes of this jurisprudence, to take a female slave was basically to take her either as a wife for yourself or a wife for your son. And you have to treat her with that kind of respect. Again, it's totally alien to our way of thinking, but it's not right to look at this through that lens.
Yeah, she becomes your daughter-in-law.
Exactly.
And not only legally, but morally.
Exactly right.
And he says
exactly
treat her
right.
like a daughter, which also means that just because she's your property, okay, you don't have relationships with your daughter.
Right.
And you don't have relationships with your daughter-in-law, even if she's a slave.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And the law will continue to illustrate that in later chapters.
And ultimately, we also see Solomon making comments in Proverbs that the slave, a pampered slave, ends up being a son. If you pamper your slave, he ends up being a son to you. It's something intense. Okay. Do you want to read on, sir?
Sure, why not?
Okay.
Where do you want to start for the audience?
We're beginning now at 21, verse 12. We've having covered the first 11 verses.
No, this is on personal injustice.
Yes, sir.
Okay?
He who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death, but if he did not lie in wait for him, but God let him fall into his hand, then I appoint you a place to which he may flee. So this is intricate stuff.
Yep.
If, however, a man acts presumptuously towards his neighbor so as to kill him craftily, you are to take him even from my altar that he may die.
So he's talking about the difference between premeditated murder and manslaughter. You run somebody over with your car because he stepped out in front of you, that's manslaughter.
Right. If he did not lie in wait for him.
You didn't
right.
murder him.
Exactly.
You killed him.
Yes.
And there is a difference.
There is a difference.
Go ahead.
And this is the origin, I think, of our jurisprudence.
Everything
This
is.
type of nuance.
This whole book is what our basic law in this country is based on.
I agree with
and
that.
they deny it. They want to abolish it. Well, what you have but chaos when you don't have authority and civilization and justice.
Exactly right.
Go ahead, my brother.
Exactly right. Now, he who strikes his father or mother shall surely be put to death. He who kidnaps a man, whether he sells him or he is found in his possession, shall surely be put to death. He who curses his father or mother shall surely be put to death. If men have a quarrel and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and he doesn't die but remains in bed, if he gets up and walks around outside on his staff, then he who struck him shall go unpunished. He shall only pay for his loss of time and take care of him until he is completely healed.
Workman's compensation.
Only directly. It's
Yeah.
on me to compensate.
Sure. Well, you know, the guy
if I
who
cause the injury.
the guy who pays the premium is paying it in advance in case he.
Ain't that something?
Okay, go ahead.
If a man strikes his male or female slave with a rod, and he dies at his hand, he shall be punished. If, however, he survives a day or two, no vengeance shall be taken, for he is his property. If men struggle with each other and strike a woman with child so that she gives birth prematurely, yet there is no injury, he shall surely be fined, as the woman's husband may demand of him, and he shall pay as the judges decide. But if there is any further injury, then you shall appoint as a penalty life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise.
So here, the sanctity of the unborn child is protected, right here,
Absolutely right.
because the man is going to be punished for causing it, even if it was accidental. And we are not even punishing people who do it purposely and for a fund. You want to know why the spirit of death rolls over this country? We invited it in when we passed the law allowing it. It's one thing when a person sins, but when the law legalizes evil, then the country will suffer. You wonder why people are running around shooting people? The spirit of death is operating in our country because we invited it in. We opened the door for that spirit to come in. What do you want to say about the other things besides a pregnant woman?
Well, let's see.
You had some comments about the misinterpretation of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
Well, many times the Tanakh is characterized like this. The Bible teaches an eye for an eye. That is nonsense. The Bible teaches no such thing. In this very narrow context of two men fighting and a pregnant woman getting injured during their melee or during their scrap, then it talks about the injury done to woman and or child is answered this way, that the injury you cause shall be caused upon you. That's the correct interpretation in this very narrow context. This is not at all characteristic of Hebrew jurisprudence. It's not. It's a gross misrepresentation of it. And now, because in fact, we have this very elaborate system of laws to ensure that an eye for an eye is not, most assuredly not, the system of jurisprudence. Can we agree on that? That the whole law is to prevent vengeance being taken without justice being rendered.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
So it's fair to say that an eye for an eye is a gross mischaracterization of Hebrew jurisprudence.
Because over here it says with the pregnant woman that the husband will decide what he wants for compensation, right? But it then says as the judges apply. So he can say he wants $1 million, but the judges can say, no, it's $750,000. Okay?
Right.
And so it's left up to people who are unbiased.
And at that, by the way, even at that, that is only in the context where the baby is born prematurely and everything else is fine. But it's taken out of everyone's hands once there's an injury. Because once there's a manifest injury, then God states this shall be an eye for an eye. The judges no longer have a say. This is above and beyond a judge's interpretation. So even here we see that nuance, that there are some things the judges get to decide and some things they don't get to decide.
Well, I was defending a person's character in a federal court once, and I don't know if it did the individual any good, but I think it did. First of all, it reassured them they weren't a monster, and second of all, maybe the judge was slightly lenient, but he did say that the sentence I'm passing is based on the guidelines I have, and I can't violate those. So if I want to be more lenient and give him 5 years, the guideline says if he's guilty of it, and which he pleaded guilty to, then it says he's going to serve 10 years. Okay? Now, the only mercy he can get is based on his behavior in prison, whether they give him time off for good behavior and parole him earlier. But my sentence needs to be 10 years.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
So justice is what we need, more justice. We're letting the guilty get off with nothing in some cases, or next to nothing. And we're really, when we're biased, we're letting people go to jail for things they should never go to jail for. They should get slapped on the wrist, fined, or do some community activity. And this is the thing that is going on right now, is that minorities are saying, you don't treat me the same way as you would your own kind. And they have a point, you know? Why do I get pulled over every time I have a light out or this, and you want to give me a ticket or arrest me when somebody else you probably wouldn't even pull over? Okay? Why am I being targeted? So we got to be careful that we don't jump to conclusions all the time and thinking the person is guilty just because they've been pulled over. Go ahead and read.
Well, we have to search out these matters without a doubt. Starting again at verse 26, if a man strikes the eye of his male or female slave and destroys it, he shall let him go free on account of his eye. If he knocks out a tooth of his male or female slave, he shall let him go free on account of his tooth. If an ox, now that's could be a substantial penalty because that slave could have been responsible for my livelihood. So if I knock out that slave's tooth, I pay dearly, and I lose the services of that.
So what is it saying here? Be careful about your brutality. If you just want to fly off the handle, you know, it's going to cost you.
If an ox scores a man or woman to death, the ox shall surely be stoned and its flesh not eaten, but the owner of the ox shall go unpunished. However, if an ox was previously in the habit of goring and his owner has been warned, yet he does not confine it, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned and its owner shall be put to death.
Harsh.
Very.
Very harsh.
Very.
You know, we see...
But the person has been warned. So basically, this person is treated as if he's guilty of murder.
Yeah, not manslaughter.
Nope.
The thing that...
No city of refuge here.
You know, in our society, we have all these people who have bought pit bulls, and they've allowed them to be trained in such a way that they're very aggressive. That dog doesn't have to learn to be aggressive. It needs to be treated and trained differently when you bring them up. Where did pit bulls come from? Came from ancient Italy. They used them in war to get the enemy out of their trenches, okay? And they would release the dogs in there to do the damage.
Release the hounds, yes.
Okay? And so now, if you're carrying a legal weapon like this dog, the way you raised it and allow it to be aggressive, you know, judges need to come down on these people much more harshly than they do. I'm just bringing things into the modern era from the guidelines God gave the Israelites.
We can see the antecedents of that, right, in these things. Now, verse 30, if a ransom is demanded of him, however, so it's harsh, but if a ransom is demanded of him, in other words, you can spare your life if you do this, he shall give for the redemption of his life whatever is demanded of him. Whether it scores a son or a daughter, it shall be done to him according to the same rule. If the ox scores a male or female slave, the owner shall give his or her master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. Again, slaves as property, which is abhorrent to us, but that's what it was. It was what it was. If a man opens a pit or digs a pit and does not cover it over, and an ox or donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall make restitution. He shall give money to its owner, and the dead animal shall become his. If a man's ox hurts another so that it dies, and they shall sell the live ox and divide its price equally. Also they shall divide the dead ox. Or if it is known that the ox was previously in the habit of goring, yet its owner has not confined it, he shall surely pay ox for ox, and the dead animal shall become his.
Well, this is all the rules for what? The laws of liability.
Right.
You doing a construction project and you don't put a fence around it and people trip over the material on the ground, you're responsible. You know, he tells them that if you have a flat roof on your house, you got to put a border around it so that if anybody goes up on the roof doesn't fall off it. I mean, every house, apartment house, everything, 90% of them in the old days had walls that went up beyond the roof 3 or 4 feet so that people could lean over the roof without falling over the roof. The apartment houses in the city, okay? Mm-hmm. I mean, you can go up there and, I mean, you can understand that you'd have to jump off rather than fall off, okay? And so God is concerned about life, okay? And he's concerned in protecting life. And he's expecting us to participate in protecting life. And when you don't, you're neglectful, and you cause suffering to other people, he expects you to pay for it dearly from these scriptures. So if you believe in liability insurance, homeowners insurance, if you believe in, you know, somebody gets killed in an airplane and you have the right to sue the airline, this is where it comes from. God's saying you're entitled to compensation. Okay?
Right.
Very interesting.
Right. So when the concept of negligence is brought into play. Now, here they are. These people are in the wilderness. These people must stay together, right? Because if there's fragmentation, if there's division, then of course they'll be severely weakened and won't be able to survive because God knows what's coming, the onslaughts of the different peoples that populate the land that they're in. So what he's teaching us here is the very foundations of a civil society. Now, archaeologists and things like that tell us that there were rules for civil society elsewhere, but not among these tribal nomadic peoples. There weren't. So this would be imposed, or this would be given to a nomadic people, represents a huge leap forward. This is not a metropolis. This is not an Egypt.
Not yet.
Not yet. But this is, this is wilderness. And so we're teaching the foundations of civil behavior here. This is the origin of civics. We're being responsible. And so today we have things like, corporations that are responsible for the poisoning of groundwater because of bad habits, or the poisoning of land for generations because of irresponsible behavior and things like that. So, and that's why people get their outrage over that from this.
Well, the real key here is, Rabbi said on Saturday at Sukkot that, we never call Moses a prophet, and we don't see Moses as our Redeemer, but we see him as our teacher. And he has a lot to teach people about civilization that the world was not aware of at that time. Mm-hmm. And he was preparing them to be the greatest nation on the face of the earth. And right now, if we look at them, he's doing a fine job in allowing them to become greater than 99% of the nations on the earth. And I believe in the near future he will make them more than 100% of the greatest nation. Because when I read even what the IDF soldiers go by as their code of conduct, it will blow you away compared to the American code of conduct in the United States Army, which I had to memorize and live by. Okay? I only had 6 laws. They have 12 laws to go by. Not because they like laws, but they're trying to fine-tune why you need to be the way you are if you're representing me. Okay? So, John, that's an interesting chapter. I'm sure we don't have time to get into the next chapter.
I don't think so.
I think what we want to tell people, listen, keep reading. I know you're not going to understand everything. Hopefully, as we discuss it between ourselves, we might give you some food for thought. If you want to see our previous show, go to futureofisrael.org. If you want to write to us, go to info@thefutureofisrael.org. If you want us to sponsor the show in your area, write to us and we'll tell you how we can do it for nothing. Okay? So, have a good night. Be good. Read the law. And listen, God has your interests at heart when he wrote these. Have a good night. Shalom. And be back next week, please, and continue with us. It's very important that we understand the foundation of both Judaism, Catholicism, Christianity, and even a little bit of the Muslim world. Okay? We know that in some portions people misinterpret things and will just concentrate on one verse and take it out of context. You have to read the whole book to understand the heart of God. With that, I do say good night and be at peace. Peace with God, peace with yourself, peace with your fellow man, and even try to make peace with your enemies. Take care. Good night.